Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg's K1 Ha.
Good afternoon. Are you guys all filled up? Great conversation, great food? Yep. All right, that's what we like to hear. Welcome back to the Bloomberg CEO Forum. It's fantastic having all of you here. We, of course, had some great conversations this morning on stage talking about the trends, risks, and the opportunities that Indonesia faces as it moves toward the inauguration of President Prabowo Subianto. Really exciting times, and there's more great conversation to come. First, some housekeeping, please. There's access to closed captioning in Bahasa on the screens on either side of me, as well as on the event app. And that's the event app that you've been using all morning to do our polls. You can get access to that either at the scanning the QR code at your tables or on the screens in back of me. And of course, the last thing we want to invite you to do is to join us online. Join the conversation on social media, and please hashtag BBG CEO Forum. Let's get started.
Please welcome to the stage Shuhaela Haqim, Country Director, Tony Blair Institute, and Agung Wicaksono, Deputy Head of Planning and Investment at the Nusantara Capital Authority, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Faris Mokhtar.
Okay, selamat siang Bapak-Bapak, Ibu-Ibu. Hope you had a great lunch. One interesting topic to help you stay awake after such a heavy lunch is, of course, the new capital. Perhaps Indonesia's most ambitious and biggest real estate project that it's trying to accomplish. And we have this expert panelists here, to talk about it. Maybe I can start with both, Ibu Ella and Pak Agung. If you can, describe, the state of progress in the new capital right now. A lot of attention on it, especially, leading up to the Independence Day celebrations on August 17. A lot of optimism, but also some criticisms. So how would you describe the state of progress, Pak, in Nusantara?
Thank you, Faris. Ladies and gentlemen, I think one key message to say about Nusantara is that it's not yet done. Because it's never meant to be done overnight. It's never meant to be done by Jokowi's administration. But it's the beginning, where the first time an Independence Day ceremony is held not in the island of Java. And the Independence Day ceremony on the 17th of August marks also the partial completion of the core government area. It also marked a progress of construction using state budget with an amount of about $5.4 billion US. But also at the same time, it also witnessed the progress of investment projects coming from non-state budget at about an amount of $3.7 billion US. So you see hotel already operating, number of hospitals is there. You see there the picture, exactly that's the office of the central bank next to the office of the coordinating ministers in the what we call Sumbu Kebangsaan. And there are a number of hospitals now on the way. And in fact, the president right now is waiting for the completion of the airport where he can reach the Nusantara using air traffic. Right now, this is the bridge. This is the Pulau Balang Bridge being used to access Nusantara. Now, the traffic is only about 1.5 hours compared to more than 2 hours before. And by the end of this year, when the toll fully completed and operational, not just functional, it will cut short the trip to 45 minutes. So in short, it's a city in the making, it's a dream in progress, and Pak Jokowi, more than a man of vision, is a man of action. And this action has brought the progress of Nusantara like it is right now.
What's your assessment, Bu Ella?
Well, I think I was attending the Independence Day on the August 17 with Pak Agung, right? And my quote is, "Seeing is believing." I believe probably many of you who are here today are investors, right? The big question or the elephant in the room has always been, is it a commercially viable project, right? Let me give a couple of facts to give you a little bit of why Nusantara there's a lot of misunderstanding in it. Firstly, if you look at Nusantara, yes, it is Nusantara, it is the capital city now. But then the surrounding areas, which is Balikpapan, Samarinda, Kutai Kertanegara, and Penajam Pasar Utara, these are all like established cities. And 54% of the economic drivers there is actually oil and gas, which is, if you look at deeper, the total population in these 5 areas is actually 2.6 million. As a comparison, Estonia is 1.3 million. Most countries in Africa, roughly around 2.5, 2.3. So the size matters, right? Okay, then the next challenge will be, okay, you have the size, but what's about the spending capacity? What about the commercial spending, right? And another fun fact, if you look at the data again, the minimum wage of East Kalimantan region is actually higher than West Java. And the population of the sort of rich people who spends and the middle income class is actually, 80 to 90% there. So again, the data here shows that there is actually a significant buying power. Then I would add the second layer of the sort of investment commercial assessment, right? We at the Tony Blair Institute, our mandate is to facilitate foreign direct investment to the new capital city. And we secured a $2 billion USD commitment for renewable energy there. Obviously, it will be built on like stages basis. But the way how we should look at it in terms of viability of investment in Nusantara, do not look at it as in a typical PPP model where government will come as giving you the whole certainty on the, this will be minimum 15%. You cannot see it that way. It has to be combined with sort of commercial opportunities. I'll give you just one example and I'll finish after this. There's a plan from the government to build the national data center in Nusantara. It's the largest one in the country. It will cost us around $1.2 billion investment. Obviously, it needs energy, and it will be green. So that's the reason why we have the renewable energy sources. So all in all to say is that if we look at deeper to the project itself, there are definitely room to make the project to be commercially viable. It just requires, I think, more the effort from Pak Agung to socialize this more, to give you more good news rather than what's actually available in the media, just to give a little bit of contrast on that.
And to build on that, Ibu, about investors, so you have your local conglomerates, the 9 dragons are in there. But
those are the 9 Garudas.
What about the foreign investors? Because that's one of the biggest questions that people would have about the new capital. How do you get the foreign investors? Because there are a lot of interests. You have hundreds of letters of intent, MOUs signed. But how do you get the foreign investors to cross the finish line into signing a binding agreement, basically?
So again, another fact, right? And Pak Agung, please correct me or please add on to this important information. Let's talk about 2 parts, right? The infrastructure investment and the sort of commercial investment, the broader, commerce and others. On the infrastructure investment itself, I've been in the infrastructure space in Indonesia for the last 15 years. And this is the first time in Indonesia that there is a lot of incentives that is being given in this new capital city. One example, in the past, I always fight for getting the availability payment from Ministry of Finance, right? Availability payment means the government will pay you over a long-term concession, right? 30 years, 20 years, with certain minimum return agreed upon in the beginning of your investment. And in the past, it didn't apply for unsolicited bid. in Nusantara, it actually applies for unsolicited bid. So this is again probably both Pak Agung and I will be responsible to socialize more about this kind of incentives and different ways of doing the tender mechanism. So it's not just the regular PPP where the government will issue, outline business case or final business case or whatever business case, and then we will agree on the guarantees, incentive, etc. Right? So again, this is not a regular or typical business as usual. This is an extraordinary, this is a breakthrough when it comes to the infrastructure investment incentives. So that's on the first part, on the infrastructure. Okay, the reality, again, most of the projects are given to state-owned enterprises, right? The reality for the toll road, etc. But that's because we have a timeline, right? But the future, obviously with the spending that the government will have, it will not be possible to just give it to SOE. And please add on into that part.
First of all, it's not a brownfield investment situation. So for you who seek a certain return, it's not immediately the mature place. It's a greenfield investment, also to create a green and sustainable forest city. So with that, we very much appreciate whom we call the pioneering investor. You might want to call it the Nine Dragons, but I call them really, the Garudas that make not just the Garuda Palace happens, but the city, started with the state budget, but now being enriched already with the domestic private investment. And this is important to create confidence. So if the Indonesian businessmen are not investing, then how would you convince the foreign investors? So that was the strategy we put at the beginning. But of course, along the way, Ella has mentioned about the availability payment, the foreign investors lining up for the PPP in an unsolicited manner, the UAE for one in the renewable energy sector, the Malaysia, a close neighbor now in the island of Borneo, they are committed on building government housing, for example, with the PPP. But also very importantly, we work with international credible names. The Tony Blair Institute is one, where we work together in how to, getting this foreign investment coming. But we also work, for example, with the Indonesian Investment Authority, INA, who has, within a relatively short period of time, has built confidence on investing in Indonesia. So we feel pretty much confident that it's about time only that the foreign investors will come. Until now, in the past 1 year, President Jokowi has come 7 times to IKN to initiate the groundbreaking of those investment projects. As I mentioned, some of the projects now already operating, like the hotels and the hospital, and also the public transport. And he's coming again this month for the 8th groundbreaking ceremony. And the target is, we're seeing at least one foreign investment will start constructing property that again will mark the progress. From the 7th president to the 8th president, from the 7th groundbreaking ceremony to the 8th groundbreaking ceremony. And if I said that President Jokowi is a man of action, President-elect Prabowo, whom has put IKN Nusantara as one of the 7 priority programs, alongside more equitable development as well as strengthening of the small businesses, puts an equitable growth at the center of it. So Nusantara is about a more equitable development. Having an event like this in Jakarta is something that is not a big deal anymore. But having this kind of event to be in Nusantara in a few years' time, or perhaps even in a few more months, would no longer be something difficult, because we have a 5-star hotel already standing up there. So slowly but sure, we believe that this more equitable development, more inclusive development, and more importantly, more sustainable development for a green forest city will happen.
Before we look and discuss deeper about the future of Nusantara, if I can ask you, Pak Agung, on the investment side of things, what more can be done to accelerate investments in Nusantara? getting more foreign investors, getting more domestic investors into the project?
Number one, what is most important is, of course, continuity. The biggest recipe for investment is certainty. And I know, in the past, with the whole brouhaha in the election time, people were questioning, but we have passed that. We are now in a moment where it is certain, the project stays, the law is there, and the commitment of the upcoming president is stated in the first cabinet meeting that happens in Nusantara. Secondly, of course, this certainty will be continued with the expansion of the basic infrastructure required. So you see here, for example, the pond, the embung in Indonesian language. There are now about 20 ponds like this in Nusantara, and we're going to expand this more into about 30 more. This is important not only to be the source of water, because no matter where you are, you start a new city, you start with creating water supply. I was before working for a company that established industrial estate in new cities in Cikarang and in east part of Jakarta, in Kendal, in central Java. It began with water. This is the same thing with Nusantara. This is already ongoing. And now what we are securing, just a few days ago, we had a meeting with the Commission 2 of the Parliament discussing about the budget allocated for infrastructure on Nusantara for 2025. And they put an agreement on that. So this will ensure the continuity and the certainty that expansion of the infrastructure will help all the investment commitment, which right now, if I'm telling you, those investment commitment is already spread not only in the area where we have infrastructure, but also areas where it is still a barren land. You see, that's how big the interest is. And that is why now the key is to expand the infrastructure to make sure that the interests of the investors are well served to then create the city.
And building on continuity, and Buella as well, if you can jump in, you have a new administration coming in, and also future administrations coming in later on. How do you see the future of Nusantara panning out, not just under the Prabowo's administration, but successive administrations, in terms of the political commitment, in terms of the financial commitment?
So number one, I'll begin first with the financial commitment. The scheme that was mentioned by Ibu Ella, the availability payment scheme, is sealed through a decree by the Minister of Finance, where every year from now to 2030, 0.1% of our GDP is allocated to finance the availability payment for PPP projects in Nusantara. And from 2030 onwards until 2045, it is even expanded to 0.15% of the GDP, not the state budget, but the GDP of Indonesia is for that. So that's the kind of financial commitment for funding not only the capital expenditure of the investment projects, for example, building a government apartment, but also the OPEX, the operation, the maintenance of the government housing for the civil servants to stay. So that is number one, the financial continuity. Now, for the political continuity, I'm not a politician, yeah, and I'm also not a political appointee, but I understand where your question is coming from. And that is why the most important is the statement that comes from the political leader himself, by Pak Prabowo. And now, what is also very important is the law that has secured the investment in Nusantara. The law number 3, the year 2022, that established Nusantara, was strengthened by the law number 21 just last year in 2023. So within a year, the law was revised not to weaken but to strengthen. And this was supported by all political parties at that time but one. And even that one political party now is part of the incoming ruling coalition. So that you can imagine what kind of political certainty that sealed this. But more importantly than financial and political certainty is the generational certainty. This is not a city established for Jokowi or Pak Prabowo. Not also for my chairman, which is now also the Minister of Public Works, Pak Basuki Hadimulyono. Maybe also not for my generation, but it's for the upcoming, the future young generation of Indonesia who demand housing where they can reach the workplace within less than 10 minutes. The apartment that was shown in the screen before, it was a place where I stayed during the Independence Day ceremony also. It's a 98 square meter apartment in the middle of the city where when you have it here in Jakarta, that will cost you, billions. This is provided for the young civil servants for free. It is also a city where there's a public space in front of the ministerial offices where this is the public housing. 12 tower or 47 towers already standing right now, yeah, and 47 tower will be ready at the end of the year. The ceremony was in a public space where people can gather, in front of their ministerial offices. So this is the generational certainty that we're expecting. It's not for us; it's for the future generation, and that is why 2045 was the timeline we put for the certainty with the financial situation, the political certainty is in place, and the generational certainty. This is for the future generation that we put.
What about your thoughts, Ibu? And also, talking about the future, how do you convince the human aspect of it, moving people from Jakarta out of Jaksel to Kalimantan?
Yeah.
Anak Jaksel.
Luckily, I'm Jaksel. I live in Jaksel area too, so I can consider myself as Jaksel, anak Jaksel. But okay, just before I touch on that, I think we need to also address a couple of concerns, right? The reality is that obviously there are comments around what about the ESG element, the environmental social element. Look, if any of you if you've ever been to Nairobi, Kenya, you probably can see where city can coexist with forest. I've been to Nairobi, and I see how I can see forest from, the other side of the city, right? So just imagine Nairobi, if you've ever been there, it's like Nusantara, right? You can see forest from the middle of the city itself. And the fact of the matter is that, yes, there are many biodiversity elements because it is forest, right? But the fact of the matter, the carbon opportunity in Nusantara, you can double check and please do the numbers here. We have at least 30 million tons of CO2 potential capture from Nusantara. So if any of you is in that business, please do your own number on the carbon potential opportunities, right? So that's one element. On the human aspect, again, the reality, and Agung, you probably can add on things here. The reality is that there is an inequality, but inequality happens in every part of Indonesia. We still have stunting in West Java, to be fair, right? So don't tell me that we don't have stunting in Penajam Pasar or West Kalimantan. We still have stunting. So it's that, what I'm trying to say is that don't just focus on the smaller details of the concerns that public mostly see in Nusantara, but if you take, bird eye views on what really needs, what we really need to do to enable that flow of investment coming to Nusantara. So on that, my second point would be, Pak Agung, please add on here. I think there are a couple of PPP that will come up, right? Because of I think some concerns around unsolicited investment. So I believe Pak Agung is working on making the more opportunities from the solicited scenarios where the government will offer in public transportation, in waste management, and all these other infrastructure that is possible to be delivered under PPP mechanism, right? But again, the good news again, 10 years ago, if you go to Indonesia, you ask for sovereign government guarantee, you ask for ability payment, the chance is that our Minister of Finance will say no, just because it is not the current, it wasn't the thinking at that time. But now with Nusantara, if you read carefully the law and the implementing regulations, all of the incentives that was not available in 10 years ago is actually available in Nusantara. So just look at in the greater details.
Well, I'm not going to touch upon PPP so much anymore. We're now in Jakarta, and we're now in the, I think, the most heated debate is about the election in Jakarta and what would happen to Jakarta when we move to Nusantara. I say that we don't move to Nusantara. We don't leave Jakarta. Jakarta will be, still the mother city. People said in Indonesia, the ibu kota, the mother city will be in Nusantara, but the Jakarta will still be the bapak kota, the father city. Yeah? But we will create Nusantara not just as an ibu kota, not just as the capital city. People say, oh, you're going to create a Canberra for Indonesia. You're going to create a Putrajaya like it was in Malaysia. But I say that we're not creating just Canberra or Putrajaya or Washington, D.C. The core government area that we're currently building and you're seeing will be the Canberra and Putrajaya. But the idea is for Nusantara to be a new economic hub that create a new economic growth, a more well-spread, equitable growth, so that not only Jakarta and Surabaya and Bandung and all Java with 56% of the population, but also Kalimantan will grow. And that's why Nusantara, alongside Balikpapan, Samarinda, Penajam Pasir Utara, and Kutai Kartanegara, I sometimes joke that Samarinda, Balikpapan, Penajam, and Kutai can be shortened to be Sambal Petai. But that's how attractive is that area. And the attractiveness would be that Nusantara will not be just a Canberra, but it's a Canberra at the core plus Shenzhen in the surrounding. Or Putrajaya at the core plus Dubai in the surrounding. 40 years ago, the city of Shenzhen in the southern part of China was sleepy fishing village. And now is the third largest city in China after Beijing and Shanghai, and number 8, I think, in financial center. Dubai, before all the resources was found, is something in the middle of desert. But now we see what it is right now. So that's how Nusantara in the future would look like. It might not be in our lifetime, but it would be in the lifetime of my children, my grandchildren, because I think the key for us to work is not to work to get something to eat, but to build the future, and that is what we leave as a legacy of the current administration.
And if I can quickly get the experts to sort of wrap up the conversation, building on that point up, you look at China, multiple economic hubs there, Shenzhen, Beijing, India, Chennai, Bangalore, Mumbai. In Indonesia, it seems to be just Jakarta. Do you see the new capital creation, spurring the government to, launch multiple economic hubs, like what you're doing with the new capital city? So you have Jakarta, in Kalimantan, in Sumatra, in Sulawesi. What are your thoughts on that?
Certainly. If you look at the construction of Nusantara, who now benefits the most in terms of region? Certainly the island of Kalimantan. You come to Balikpapan, if you don't book your flight well in advance, you might not get a seat. Getting a hotel is already challenging. But also, if you look at the neighboring island of Sulawesi, most of the resources, the materials for construction comes from Sulawesi, especially central Sulawesi. So you can imagine the kind of economic growth happening there. Penajam Pasir Utara, the surrounding district, the surrounding kabupaten, and which is now partly the area of Nusantara, experienced 300% economic growth in the year 2023. So this is where we see the potential of new, I wouldn't call it new Shenzhen, or new Chennai, but this is how Nusantara would be, the hub for the future, at least in Kalimantan. It is attracting already the attention from Malaysia, as I mentioned, the interest on the PPP coming from Malaysian companies, also from Brunei. Darussalam was also interested. And interestingly, Singapore. Singapore is the country where we have the most number of letter of intent coming. So it is going to be a hub It's going to be a new hub, not only for Indonesia, but I believe it's going to be a new hub for Southeast Asia. And please do come to Nusantara. Seeing is believing. And I think the famous Eleanor Roosevelt said, there are people who watch things happen. There are people who also just wonder that things happen, but there are also people who made things happen. I believe you all will come together to make Nusantara happen. Thank you.
Ibu, final word from you.
I think let's be real, right? Let's be real. I think for those who are really interested to know more about the investment opportunities, again, look beyond just the existing structure. Let's look at, again, the bigger picture, right? The reality, again. The current debt to GDP for Indonesia is among, if not the lowest, right? 39.2% for Indonesia as a whole. It's still much lower than Malaysia, much lower than other countries in Southeast Asia or Asia Pacific even. So we have a very prudent fiscal management thanks to our finance minister. But then the next question, and this is the common question in the news, right? You know, the president-elect will focus on spending on the free nutritious meal or the free school meal, right? And then what's left for Nusantara, right? There's always been the sort of like debate nowadays. But then the question is that, why don't we look beyond just spending on that debt to GDP ratio? We can look at other funding modalities, right? Export financing, who doesn't involve anything around that debt to GDP ratio, who still, that Indonesia still maintain its fiscal prudence that helps to get our cost of fund to be as the same as BBB. That helps you as well, right, to convince your investors. So my point here is that I think there will be more and more opportunities in Nusantara that is backed, one, by a very solid government incentive, sovereign guarantee, availability payment, and all of this is not just business as usual. Again, compared those of you who may have come to Indonesia 10 years ago, you won't believe what is actually available in the law in terms of government incentives. Actually, Tony Blair, instead, we even plan to move our office to Nusantara to get the benefits of the tax holiday there, right? And so that's one. The second element is that I think if you look at further, the public infrastructure is not yet built in a manner where it enables the connectivity. So look at that connectivity. Transport logistic opportunities are actually enormous there. Last but not least, again, if you look into the context really matters. Our Indonesia, it has, you know, we have 280 million people, and the concentration is still in Java. The next one, Java doesn't have enough capacity to absorb the more than 58%. So the only way for us to grow is to look at beyond Java, and Nusantara is currently the most viable option for Indonesia.
Bu Ella, Pak Agung, thank you so much. If we can give our panelists a warm round of applause. Okay.
Please welcome to the stage Mira Arifin, Indonesia Country Executive, Bank of America, and Arief Budiman, Deputy CEO, Indonesia Investment Authority, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Tasya Sipahutar.
Hi everyone, how are you doing? I hope you're having a great time. And then now we're gonna talk about one of the most interesting subjects of all time, which is investments. Money, money, and money. And we have two distinguished speakers, Pak Arief. Selamat siang, Pak Arief. Good afternoon. And then Ibu Mira. Also, selamat siang, Ibu Mira.
Selamat siang. Good afternoon.
And now we're gonna have discussions about investments. But for those of you who may not be aware of what Indonesia Investment Authority is, Pak Arief, could you be so kind to give us a brief description of what INA is?
Sure. Good afternoon. Happy to be here. For those of you who don't know what INA is, we are Indonesian Sovereign Wealth Fund, but we are established roughly 3 years ago. Unlike other sovereign wealth funds, where many are in excess, those countries that have excess funds, we actually have two mandates. One is actually to invest, and the other one is to invite co-investments, primarily into Indonesia. We, as an institution, we report directly to the president. We have two-tier board, of which we have 2 ministers on our board, but the day-to-day execution is actually run by the executive board. So far, in our 3 years, we have invested roughly $3.5 billion. Our overall asset under management is now close to $10 billion from an initial capital of $5 billion only 3 years ago. We have 4 sectors that we are focusing on. Transport and logistics, this will be toll roads, seaport, warehouses. Digital, primarily digital infrastructure. Healthcare, like pharma and hospitals. And finally, energy transition, particularly around renewables, including some of the, I would say, the new energy type of energy. Having said that, we are opportunistically looking into the various sectors, and we do invest in other sectors as well. But so far, we have been investing with world-leading organizations. So out of 3.5 billion that we invested so far, roughly a little bit over $1 billion is coming from our co-investment partners. This will be the likes of GIC of Singapore, ADIA of UAE, APG, Dutch Pension Fund, also strategics such as DP World Import, Masdar in renewables, and many others. So that's a brief overview so that at least you get to know us.
Any projects?
By the way, despite our name, we have no authority whatsoever. So Indonesia Investment Authority, we are an investor, we are a commercial investors, we have no authority whatsoever. So don't ask me in the next 20 minutes about regulation, please.
Any mega or notable projects that you're working on so far that you can tell the audience here about? 1 or 2 maybe?
Yeah, so far I think people know that we have been involved in capital recycling. For example, in toll road, we invested jointly with ADIA and APG. Whereby we invest in a toll road platform. Also in digital, we are quite active in data centers, building new data centers together with GDS. GDS is one of the top 3 data center players. It's Chinese-based, but backed by Temasek. And we put $500 million, for example, in geothermal, in Pertamina Geothermal Energy IPO. So those are the things that we have done so far. This year, despite the election, we still see potential investments. There are a number of trends which we can discuss later on. One that I can give an example on is the emergence of Indonesia as a manufacturing base for a select niche, right? So obviously we all know about the EV. Now it's slowing down, but the EV demand will likely stay. Of course, we have been one of the world's largest supplier for nickel. But with the downstreaming, if you will, we are looking into areas as, for example, active cathode materials for manufacturing facilities that serve the, hopefully can serve not only globally, right? So obviously there are a number of requirements imposed by, for example, the United States or some of the European countries nowadays. But we see actually some of these niches where we actually can contribute, and hopefully this will be growing to something a little bit bigger over the next couple of years.
But you travel a lot and then you meet a lot of investors. So when they speak to you or you talk to them about Indonesia, what do you say? Like, why should they invest in Indonesia? What is it about Indonesia that they can, hey, yeah, this is a good opportunity for me to come to Indonesia? What do you say, Yusuf?
No, I think many of you are investors here. Every one of you know about the macroeconomic stability, obviously the relatively young population, demographic growth, and so on and so forth. I don't think people need convincing about coming to Indonesia. Obviously, especially with the geopolitical tensions that we have, it is one of the natural places where you go after India. The challenge is mostly around the investment opportunities, to be perfectly honest with you. Many of the Indonesian, I would say, companies or assets are either owned by state-owned enterprise, of which obviously there's a lot of progress that has happened over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, and also private business group. Right? Many of them are already big, so they don't really need a lot of capital. So finding an investable assets whereby you can actually obviously deploy your capital, but also getting some governance. I'm using governance. Sometimes people in Indonesia translate governance into like corruption. No, we are talking about just governance, right? How you actually, if you put in 30% of the capital, what kind of rights that you have, and so on and so forth. So those are some of the things that that's why we are here, to be perfectly honest, to look into some of those deals. Some of the investors, global investors, might not have the resources to actually look into the deals. It might not justify their investments, but that's why we're here. In toll road, for example, we look at the concessions to see how we actually make some of the early toll roads becoming more investable. In other areas, we structure the deal as such so that there is, for example, there is for lack of better words, downside protection, things like that, right? So, but none of this actually requires government intervention. We are behaving like private sector enterprise, and we are doing it primarily through structuring, deal structuring, if you will. Right? But I don't think investors need convincing coming to Indonesia.
How or why they should come to Indonesia? Yeah. Okay. So I invite you, if you have topics to discuss, questions, you can scan the QR code on your table, and then let's have a lively discussion. Yeah. Let's ask Ibu Mira then. Ibu Mira, you're from Bank of America. You're an investor, in a way, right? So how do you see Indonesia? Why is Indonesia different compared to Southeast Asian countries? We have Vietnam for sure, and then we have Malaysia. Quite similar, but why is it so special about Indonesia?
Well, that is correct. My name is Mira Arifin. I'm from Bank of America as the country executives. So I've been here, Bank of America itself is an investor in the sense it itself come into Indonesia 56 years ago as part of the group that first invested in Indonesia. So you see the evolution of the various different country of origins coming into Indonesia. I think the more thematics recently in the past few years have been like those, there's evolution from American to Japanese, and then you see heavy investments, particularly on the critical minerals on, from China, as well as, discussion from the South Korea, particularly in manufacturing, steel, you see Krakatau POSCO, you see Hyundai, and I think most recently thematic on the EV, I think Arief just mentioned it, touched upon it. Particularly on the EV battery space, there's Hyundai-LG partnership that announced even, the commencing of the production of EV battery as of this mid-year. So despite, a bit of a slowing down in the EV market globally, but the interest and the benefit in Indonesia is clearly being seen, right? And then, sticking on that EV thematic, you also see, announcement from, the establishment of Wuling, and then BYD comes in, which benefited from the relaxation of the import tax, and particularly, they can come into Indonesia, and then, part of the oncoming commitment is to invest maybe even in the manufacturing. So you see some of this thematic. You see also the other space, like in the financial sector. You've seen some of the acquisitions of banks in the past from, I think from our neighboring countries, ASEAN, whether that is Thailand, Singapore, and as well as the Japanese. So, you know, some of these actually very good catalysts, and in fact, we're delighted to have INA as a partner, and the establishment of INA really elevate Indonesia in the level of, you know, attracting investment. We are serious, you know, but there are people, there's a lot of criticism, of course, right, comes along the way. But that's part of the process of our evolution and the fact that we're continuously transforming ourselves into better. So where Bank of America plays in here is we extend our global network, our accessibility towards investors, and including ourselves, right, to come to Indonesia. Our job is really to promote the presence of Indonesia, the opportunities around, despite, you know, the abundance or the lack of opportunities. And there are things to create. One of the things we always put our glasses on as well, where the policies are, right? I think there's question, obviously, on the budget. You know, where is this opportunity on you know, the free food, for example, for children? As an institution, we love DNI, and we love, you know, we even contribute back to the community towards the children. I always said that we always said that they are our future. So there's a long-term investment, right, with all this, with the people, with the healthcare comes into place, right? Whereas the world is going into aging population, but Indonesia still have the bonus demographic, right? And we are on target to plan to be a wealthy country by 2045. So, you know, if we see the children born from now and then, you know, they will be the most productive age by that 2045. So think positively, right? You know, there's opportunities for multinationals in the healthcare space, even the locals, right, will expand their businesses because of these needs, right? So, you know, in the personal care, healthcare, and then comes along, how do you fuel all this? You need energy, right? And that energy comes in, yes, the government has a commitment, which we're part of, obviously, on the JETP. Yes, people are waiting for the execution of it, but the directive is a very good directive, right? We are part of that process. And in fact, on a side chat bar with a conversation with Arief just now, there is a plan on even on the renewables, you know, like around even the new capital and all that. So that's we're going in the right direction. Data center, digital infrastructure is very massive opportunities as well, right? Consumer, anything with that. But, you know, all of these energy consumption, you know, with data center, we need a lot of power. So, you know, do we have enough reserve? You know, so that renewable will have to come into space. I do believe there was a, you know, one of the attendees were from the renewables. I'm not sure if he's still here, but, you know, you could have a testimony. I'm sure it's part of his interest. So if you look at that, and then, you know, not only FDI, right? We're focused, FDI takes a longer term. So, you know, the policies, the political stability is really important to make sure that we continue with this, you know, massive growth. I mean, people are concerned, you know, sort of quarter on quarter, we're 5.05% GDP growth. But come on, if we look at the past 10 years, if our growth is consistent even at that level, it shows our sustainability, right? It is still one of the fastest growing market. You know, we have, you know, the political stability despite where the world is currently. Please keep it that way, right? You know, we've got great visitors, obviously, you know, not only in the Sustainable Forum, we've got the Pope and all that. So we are on the onset of, you know, the global platform, which we should be proud of. You know, I think that's something for us to leverage. There are challenges sometimes in, you know, probably policy changes, but thinking of it positively, it is really to facilitate the change. And, you know, we get better, make us to be, it's a little bit painful probably on the short term, but on the global term, really to put us in the global play. I'll pause there for a moment.
We're going to take one question
Sure.
from the audience. So despite FDI booms in Indonesia in the past decade, and I have the number for that. So last year, Indonesia recorded $47 billion in investment. In rupiah, that's like nearly 800 trillion. That's a lot of money. And so, but there is a labor absorption issue going where the ratio of investment to jobs is actually on the decline. So what do you think this means for Indonesia and for Arief too? Like maybe when you talk to investors talking about jobs and labors, what is actually, is that a concern for them? Is that a burning issue for them when you speak with investors about labor and jobs?
I can take a first crack, if I may.
While I'm thinking my answer.
47 billion, that's massive. I think Southeast Asia benefited from about 236 billion investment. So Indonesia quite get a large, out of the ASEAN 6, so we got about 22% of, the share of the investment. Yes, we should be happy, but should we be satisfied? No. I think you do mention about, some of the labor and all that. I think something we need to see the development, all this investment coming in the various different countries. I think Indonesia has been skewed more towards that manufacturing and EV or some of the critical minerals. Whereas if you see Singapore, which has a massive portion of that investment, had been into like the family offices, the financial services, and I think Thailand more focused on like the, sort of the travel and leisure. Malaysia is particularly on the semiconductor. So there are pockets that we can, tap. I think it's important to see the ability for capital flow, right, for any investors, and kind of the long runway of policy. So if you come with a massive investment, you do want to make sure that you got your money back or your investment, your return appropriately. And as a bank, that's our job also to advise clients and kind of go back and forth to, regulators, say, is there anything that, please follow the global standard. But there are some areas that Indonesia is more advanced. For example, in banking, we're probably closer to Basel III compliance much earlier than anybody else in the world, right? So, that's where's the right balance? I think, the fact that the current government and looking forward to the new government has been hiring a lot of good professionals, people with experience. I think that should augment our presence in the investor market.
Yeah, I am not an economist. I'm not an expert of this, so just take my comments with a whole grain of salt. But you asked about what are the investors are. Obviously, you cannot. There is not a homogeneous set of investors. So clearly, in some sectors, if you talk about critical minerals, if you talk about some of the manufacturing. Part of this is also because of the fact that the newer investments does come with a higher with technology that has higher productivity, right? So if you look into some of the manufacturing plants, processing plants, they do have higher productivity, and we need to have that in order for us to be globally competitive. So that's from a foreign investor perspective in those sectors. But for overall economy, they do also recognize that it needs to trickle down. And if you invest, for example, in areas like consumer, if you invest in areas, even in infrastructure, if it relates to public travel, right? So we do invest in toll roads. So we do actually measure and see whether actually the public travel is actually there, right? So because it's a measure. So if you talk with the investors about this kind of like in their respective specific individual investment segments, probably they don't. But overall, for the stability of economy, it's actually quite important to ensure that some of this wealth created get trickled down. But I think I think the government, both the existing and incoming, has a intuition to actually address this issue. If you look into some of the programs that they have, again, I'm not an economist, it does look into the small and medium enterprise. It does look into the lower medium to lower income segments, which is very important, right? Because you cannot expect that you do need to have a thriving economy. What I mean by thriving economy is that some of you might have gone to mining plants in Sulawesi and what have you. You do have economies there. It's not just the mine, right? There is industrial estate. There is kind of like beverages that actually really grow that economy. So I think there is a notion. This notion is already acknowledged and recognized by the government, and we're going to see probably some of the interventions in the government to make sure that the investments and the wealth created being diverse. Some of you more traditionalist economists might see this as, I would not say a bit more populist program, but it is needed, right? You do need to actually, what do you call it, instill entrepreneurialism. You do need to instill some of the small, medium-price enterprises. And we have a lot of them, right? In our economy, it's actually one of the largest, right, portion. But how do we make them thrive? If they thrive, their income will be higher. If their income will higher, they will actually consume more products. They will get more advanced products. They get more leisure, and the economy is actually growing. In short, yes, it's a concern. But I do see some of the programs that are coming can actually alleviate some of those. But at the end of the day, you need to actually have a thriving economy where not only the big corporations, the big state-owned enterprise, but people coming up with ideas at the various income level, yeah, and be thriving in the economy, because we also need that.
The biggest event that we are looking forward to in Indonesia is the new president in October. So for Arief, what is your strategy, or how do you ensure investors, that as we welcome the new president, we will still have policy continuation and then projects continuation?
Yeah. So there was a question earlier that got skipped, right? Do investors actually change with global macroeconomy, with Indonesian headwinds, what have you? Many of you may be a representative of this institution. Many of the global institutions actually have if you are not like a GP or a private equity, they actually have 20, 30, if you talk about the real sovereign wealth fund, if you talk about pension funds that have a lot of capital, right, in the $1 trillion, they actually have 20, 30, 50-year horizon. So they have already made their mind about some of the geographies that they need to be focusing on. And like I said, where else you have 300, relatively young, still had room for improvement, and relatively open economy. And historically, for multiple decades, actually have shown stability, both economically as well as politically, right? I'm talking about relative terms here. So there is no question that they will remain to kind of like invest. I guess with regard to where we be focusing on, we are a small entity. We are only $10 billion. But we hope with some of the capital that we invest jointly with some of our co-investment partners, it can actually instill more confidence to the economy. We have some first-time institutional investors into Indonesia. By the way, we are, I forgot to mention, we are direct investors. So we are not, while we do participate in some IPOs, our capital and our co-investor capital will be around for 20, 30, in some cases, 50 years. So you do need to have, as institutions, some of these global institutions actually made, for lack of better words, they have faith in Indonesia already. So we have historically 4 areas. These 4 areas are areas, sorry to repeat, yeah, transport, logistics, digital, healthcare, and energy transition. These are areas where we see that there is sufficient deal flows, there is sufficient global appetite, and where we can be focusing on. Now, over the next 3 to 5 years, obviously there is some themes from the incoming government, which is a continuation, if you think about it, of areas where we feel we can actually add value, right? So things such as, I would say, manufacturing base. So already now, we cannot announce it yet, but with some of the reconfiguration of global supply chain, we are actually working on a couple of relocation of some of the manufacturing plants, right? I mentioned something about EV. We are talking about also about some of the areas in healthcare, specifically pharmaceutical, right? So that is actually one. There's something about food and agriculture. This is actually a big agenda from the government. Obviously, we are currently brainstorming on some ideas on how can we ensure food security. And of course, some of the initial topics will remain to be important. Energy security, food security will remain to be important in the incoming administrations. So we probably add a couple of themes where we can be prioritizing on. At the same time, sorry to talk so long, I'm just wasting our time because I have 7 more seconds. But we are still a young institution. We don't claim that we know everything about the world. Some of the best ideas that we've gotten over the last 3 years is actually coming from our co-investment partners, from our advisors, mostly from co-investment partners. So if any of you representing investors in whichever sectors, if you think there is actually a way for us to enhance, right? We are not a regulator, but we do have a voice. We have ex-officios in our supervisory board. And areas that is untapped, do let us know. Do give us ideas, because I'm sure, at least in my personal experience, the global investors also appreciate that, right? So if there are more investable assets, there are more investors coming in, for them it's also good. It's not a competition. If you're talking about institutional investors, it's not a competition. They also need liquidity. So if there are more investors in the market, like India, what have you, people will get more comfortable to invest. And if there is something in their respective institution, they need to probably kind of like moving into other investors is good. So anyways, we are open for ideas, suggestions. We are here. Yeah.
So if you have investment ideas, please remember Indonesia Investment Authority, but no authority, right, Pak? And please remember also Ibu Mira if you need investment advices. Thank you so much, Bapak and Ibu, for your kind explanation. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Raja Amir Shah bin Raja Azwa, CEO, HSBC Amanah, and Romy Buchari, Sharia Banking Director, Maybank Indonesia, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Soraya Pramatasari.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around as we are about to enter the next session, which hopefully is as exciting as the previous sessions, if not more. I would like to welcome our esteemed panelists this afternoon, Mr. Raja Amir from HSBC, Amanah, and also Bapak Romy Buchari, head of Sharia Banking at Maybank in Indonesia. Thank you very much for taking the time to share your experience and your expertise in this sector today. Now, Islamic finance and banking is indeed a segment that's been growing rapidly over the years. And Indonesia, as we know, is the country with the largest Muslim population in the world. And it is also Southeast Asia's biggest economy, with an annual GDP growth of 5%. So it is, by any measure, a big market. We all know that, but those are headline numbers. It would be interesting to find out from both of you, if I may ask, what are the potential in the sectors that are going to be central to Islamic finance industry? Where are the growth coming from? Maybe I can start with you, Pak Romy.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Nice to have everyone here and seeing some familiar faces. Just a little bit on a bit of a background of where Islamic or Sharia banking in Indonesia, as we call it here. Yeah. We are a nation of over 250 million people now, population-wise, majority Muslim. However, the penetration has been quite slow. Yeah? For the longest time, we were at about 5% penetration. Now we're at about 7%. This is we're talking about in terms of Islamic banking asset. Okay. Having said that, the growth in the Islamic finance sector, especially on the banking side, has been quite tremendous compared to the conventional side. Where conventional, we're running at a clip of about maybe 8 or 9% tops on a yearly basis. On the Islamic side, we've been running at about 14, 15. Some banks have gone into maybe about 20% on annual CAGR. Albeit, obviously, it's coming from a quite low base. However, the growth is there. The potential, when you're talking about segments, I think all segments are, the world is our oyster from our Islamic banking side. It's just a matter of getting the economic of scale to be really there. At this moment, we are at about 800 trillion, much better as compared to a few years back. But still, like I said, we're still within 7%. The growth is there. So far, a lot of the growth has been driven from the supply side, with the government helping by facilitating a level playing field. Yeah. What we need next, later on, would be on how do we create that awareness, how to get the demand side to actually start pulling the side. So that's a little bit in the background of where we are in Indonesia.
Mr. Raja Amir, what are your thoughts on this?
Yep. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a good afternoon to everybody. So just to take a step back in terms of where we are as an industry globally, before we zoom in specifically on Indonesia, and to give you a kind of a context as to how much the Islamic finance industry has grown over the past 60 years or so. So currently, as of 2021, the data provided by the London Stock Exchange Group states that global Islamic finance assets currently stand at about $4.5 trillion. So what is that relative to the global financial industry? It's slightly less than 1%, 0.98 to be exact. Okay, so some people say that's small, some people say that's moderate, some people say that's arguably that's quite a good run, given that you're competing against a 200, 300-year-old financial system. And when we break down this segment of this $4.5 trillion worth of assets, clearly the first sector would be Islamic banking assets. These are your core lending, your trade, financing, and so on, which constitutes about 72% of global assets. Secondly is sukuk at 17%. So sukuk is, there's a lot of issuances coming out of the GCC. Republic of Indonesia is a frequent issuer in the international capital markets, but predominantly coming out of the GCC because of the situation with the oil before, where they needed to finance the budget deficits. Thirdly is Islamic funds. So these are your AUM, your asset under management, which currently stands at about 5% of the overall industry, and slightly circa just below 1% of the total AUM of the financial system as well. And fourthly is other Islamic financial institutions, which are your crowdfunders, your buy now, pay laters, and so on and so forth, which is standing at 4%, but I must say it's grown substantially over the last decade. And then finally, it's the takaful assets, which stands at about 2% to date. So that's the breakdown in terms of the the 5 sectors that Islamic finance is coming from. And within those sectors, while we say Islamic banking, obviously it's growing at a very fast compounded annual growth rate. Within those sectors, there's also a lot of opportunities as well. If I can just briefly touch on which are the countries where this growth is deriving from. So as of December 2022, the top 8 countries of which Islamic finance originated from were from the GCC. Out of these 8 countries, they were predominantly GCC, but Indonesia and Malaysia contributed about 20%, 18% to be exact, with Malaysia standing at number 3, and Indonesia standing at number 7. So Malaysia has about 15% of the market share, global market share. Indonesia has about 3.3%, out of which the Malaysian banking system is already touching 45% of Islamic assets. And within the Indonesian banking system, we heard it's already touching 7, some data points to 8. So I think, with a slew of incentives which are being done, specifically focusing on Indonesia, the young demographics, we heard, 87% of the population identifies with being Muslim. There is clearly, and 65% of the shares listed on the Jakarta Stock Exchange are Sharia compliant. A young population which is digitally savvy, religiously conscious. I think specifically to Indonesia and Asia Pacific at large, the opportunities are immense.
Okay. And what about industry sector? Are there particular industry sector that you see will drive growth in Islamic financing, for example?
So currently at the moment, how it stands is that 45% of Islamic Bank's balance sheet is extended to the consumer segment. So these are your mortgages, your car loans, personal financing and so on, with the remainder coming from a mixture of treasury and markets as well as the wholesale market. So I believe with the increasing literacy of Islamic finance for consumers, OJK is clearly doing a lot of regulatory push to ensure that the financial literacy of Islamic banking grows up. Currently it's about 9% in Indonesia, relative to the conventional financial literacy, which is about 49%. I think the sector that will grow would be, in line with the economy, would be on the retail sector, and also supported by the wholesale sector, because a lot of these companies need Islamic financing in order for them to qualify as a Sharia stock. So I think, and that will be also coupled with the growth in the sukuk market, with more issuers raising debt in the international market. And I must say, Suraya, that whenever you issue a sukuk in the international capital markets, it's always oversubscribed because there's a lot of asset and liabilities from banks chasing these assets. There's just not enough sukuk going around globally.
So I suppose the potential for growth in the sukuk issuance is still...
It's still, where we are currently in the global interest rate environment, it's not, the best time to issue. Okay. But in terms of where the trajectory is of the Fed fund rates, it's expected to go back to its heyday of 2021.
Okay. Now, Indonesia is now pushing for sustainable financing, as the country is transitioning into a more renewable energy. The government is very aggressive in pushing for investment in nickel, for example, trying to make Indonesia a hub for electric vehicle manufacturing. How do you see that benefiting, or how can you take advantage of that push? Pak Romy, mungkin?
This is a quite new and emerging kind of opportunities that not just Islamic banking is going after. So I think it's not just specific to Islamic banking in terms of opportunities. Many of these industries are infrastructure in nature. So the kind of cash outlay, the kind of support that's needed is quite sizable. So from Islamic banking perspective, we do have a number of Islamic banking players here in Indonesia. They are quite sizable. But many of the other players are still quite small.
I see.
So in terms of capability, many are quite capable to do that, in terms of providing a long-term kind of balance sheet support or a system or infrastructure assistance. However, many would be still quite limited, but perhaps I would imagine they would be able to play and support the peripheral kind of industry that would support this main drive and EV and the sustainability side. So I think this is very good in terms of opportunity for Islamic banking, because a lot of it is it's a shared kind of value with the Sharia principles. That's one. Secondly, how do we make sure that many of the Islamic banking institutions that we have can actually compete with the conventional banking providers? So that's key to some of the smaller players. The bigger players, yes, we can go toe to toes, but the smaller players will need a bit more support, as well as maybe in Bahasa we could call it keberpihakan, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a bit more policy on the government side to help some of the smaller players.
Mr. Raja Amir?
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. The tenets of Islamic finance are, if not, they're similar to what ESG principles are. In fact, some argue that ESG took the bite out of Islamic finance because Islamic finance already from the get-go had exclusion criteria. You can't invest in tobacco, you can't invest in weaponry companies and so on. So the exclusion criteria was already there. In fact, there's a lot of the discourse nowadays is regarding how does Islamic finance play a more centralized role, given that ESG seems to have taken the buzz out of it. So, in terms of specifically funding some of these projects we're talking about, we've seen Saudi Arabia, such as the Private Investment Fund. Republic of Indonesia has already issued 3 tranches of green sukuk, followed up by a sustainable sukuk. The government of Malaysia has issued a sustainable sukuk. We've seen sustainability-linked sukuks and various other products, which is naturally fit to not only fund the national development, because the Islamic finance needs to be at the center of what the country intends and aims to do, and it fits generally in line with some of these projects which bring out a better outcome for humanity and society at large.
Okay, that's interesting. But Romy, I'm particularly interested in what you said earlier about Islamic banks being having small size and things like that. I know the Indonesian Financial Services Authority, known as OJK, is now has issued a regulation trying to push mergers, and by requiring the conventional banks to spin off their Islamic units. With the thinking of perhaps these small units then will merge to, become a bigger institution. What are your thoughts on that? Is consolidation good for the industry, or what do you think?
I think in general, consolidation is good, especially where we are in Indonesia. Prior to, let's say, 1998 crisis, we had about, 250, over 300 banks. And the government, along with the industry player, has really consolidated quite a bit now. We're at about 100 plus. But still, that's pretty high. Yeah? Right. Compared to our neighbors, let's say in Malaysia, how many do we have? Yeah? On top of that, we still have thousands of rural development banks. Yeah? So consolidation is good. The spin-off requirement that OJK has, what government has, to some aspect goes against kind of the logic of, okay, consolidations, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe this is the kind of take, a smaller step first before we take the bigger step. Sort of like forcing maybe the existing players to, one, be more serious about their business in the Islamic side. Secondly, really put investment into this business. And third, obviously, ultimately, a moral consolidation that we can look into the Islamic banking industry. Right now, we're seeing banking landscape Islamically here in Indonesia. We have one large players, but not too many other ones that are quite, sizable. It's like a football squad or a basketball team, right? Well, I'm showing my age here. You cannot only have Michael Jordan, right? You need the Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman too. Right. So this is what we need in the medium term, or if not sooner, in Indonesia.
Okay. What about?
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree that consolidation is important in the industry. Not least from a capital perspective. You need sufficient capital to be able to absorb risk in a highly competitive environment. So by pooling together different banks, you're able to really achieve that capitalization ratio. I think as Pak Romy mentioned, the one bank which is already dominating 57% of the market, and that since 2021, has already seen a positive effect in the market in terms of the deepening of the market, the kind of products that they're offering. So that's definitely a positive. Another positivity would be the availability of interbank liquidity in the market, which will enable banks to lend and finance one another in times of shortages, which will absorb the shock that could come in a system when money is being pulled out. I think that would allow more of a focus and a targeted approach, and also capitalizing on the reach, because when you when you merge, you are able to capitalize on the reach of the branch network, which is very important if you want to serve wider society, especially in the rural areas. And lastly, of course, is to enable a bank to compete globally.
Yeah, so size matters.
Size matters, but at the same time, there also needs to be, obviously through regulation and consumer protection and whatnot, there needs to be that balance to also ensure that there is competition. This has actually resulted in competition. The consumer has not been shortchanged in the whole array of things, and it has brought about a benefit to society at large. So obviously there needs to be that check and balance.
Would your bank be interested in acquiring any of these assets once they are spun off, for example?
Yeah, I'll be pleased to chat with anybody outside the hall if they have any assets that they'd like to show us.
Okay. And Romy?
Same answer.
Okay. Okay. Now, this is actually, I think it's in the back of everyone's mind. We always talk about Indonesia's potential, so huge, and yet, as you both mentioned, the proportion of Islamic banking, Islamic finance, to the total banking industry is still very small. It's only about 7%, less than 10%, versus 40% in Malaysia. And Malaysia has, less population than Indonesia. What is it that Malaysia did that we can replicate, or how can we learn from Malaysia, to be able to grow the Islamic banking assets?
So I would say that, definitely the regulatory element has played a substantial role in the growth of Islamic finance in Malaysia. We know Bank Muamalat Indonesia was established in 1991. Tabung Haji was established 20 years prior to that in Malaysia. So there's a need for a concentrated effort by the regulator, which we do see now happening in Indonesia from OJK, to be able to push the industry further. You need that regulatory push. You need that the regulatory environment to be favorable for Islamic banking to grow.
Can you give some examples of those policies specific to Malaysia?
So specific to Malaysia, I would say that number one is the tax treatment has been equalized, which Pak Romy alluded to is already happened already. So if there's a sale and buyback transaction, the respective you don't get double taxed on the sale and buyback. There has been specific incentives, in particular the capital markets. So a quick one would be that in the Malaysian capital markets, you get 90% deduction on second-party opinion providers, who come in and give you the SPO on a transaction, and you get to claim expenses for all the setup costs for the financing program, for example. There was International Currency Business Unit under MIFC, which is Malaysia's Islamic Financial Center, which gives tax-free treatment to banks to position their US dollar books in Malaysia. And it was open to all, not just Malaysian banks, but to all global banks. So with this, that was phase one, really, because if you come back to the regulator now, they'll say enough taxes. We've already come to a level that we're comfortable. Now it's about really course correction. If we've missed out in the last 20 years, we've already reached 40%, we're about to touch 50%. Now it's really about ensuring that Islamic banking has actually achieved its outcome, which is what we call the Maqasid Sharia. If you look at are the undeserved populations being supported? Are banks using their zakat money to finance and provide grants to undeserved populations? So that's more of the Islamic banking 2.0, which the regulators are also pushing now, given that it's already plateaued. So, we've reached 50%. What's next for Islamic banking, and what more can be done to ensure that it comes back to
retaining its significance?
Retaining its significance, but is market share the only barometer in this game? Or is it, ensuring that Islamic banking truly is for all, and is, it really is not just taking conventional banking and Islamicizing it. You're actually looking at the fundamental core and creating a unique value proposition which will enable you to compete and stand toe-to-toe with conventional banks.
That's really interesting. Now, still looking at Malaysia, I was just looking the other day about the female role in the industry. And apparently, I read I think, a report from a news agency that of the top 10 female figures in Islamic finance industry, actually are in Malaysia. Now, how do you see this? The importance of female role in the Islamic banking industry, because obviously, religiously, women in Islam, arguably may not be expected to perform, as much as the male. Where do you see that happening going forward? Will there be more female, positions? Also, Pak Romy, if you could add to that, the situation here in Indonesia, maybe in Maybank as an example, for instance, and also there's a study that says that even though 56% of the target for lending are actually women, but their access to get those loans, Islamic loans, are actually in the smaller size, are actually more difficult. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's a bit of a landmine question, so I'll try to navigate it. I think at the end of the day, it's important to have diversity at the table, be it age, be it gender, be it disabilities or otherwise. So I think it's always important to have different views at the table. I think we've seen a number of Islamic CEOs in the Islamic banking industry become female.
But is there a push from within the industry itself?
I wouldn't say the industry per se, it's more on an organizational basis. So, for example, in HSBC, we have a target of senior leaders, to come from the female population. So we actually look at, who's in a management position that we can push up, but obviously it needs to be merit-based. Even in terms of our interview panels, we have to have a balanced interview panels to ensure that it's diverse. So I wouldn't say it's, Malaysia is really quite a diverse and balanced country. I see ministers who are female. We've seen, politicians, police, you name it. But even within the Sharia scholars as well, one of the most eminent Sharia scholars in Malaysia, Prof. Engku Rabiah, she's a female. I have a Sharia member of my Sharia committee who's a legal expert who sits on my Sharia committee as well. But I must say, we did not strategically do that. They got there because of merit, and they have an equal voice at the table.
Okay, thank you. Romy, if you might,
Yeah, I think it's the same. Diversity is quite important for us. But again, the industry is quite nascent. So the talent pool that's available is still limited, right? That's one. But from our perspective, Maybank, let's say, for instance, just like what Raja mentioned earlier, our Sharia board committees, a lot of them are women's. A lot of my teams are women, and they actually drive many of our businesses very well. So that's something that we will continue to concentrate on. Also, let's say we have something in terms of, we have Sharia thought leaders kind of forum that we do on a regular basis. We always ensure we will have speakers and panelists and participants from our women's audience as well as industry players. So I think it's in general something that we need to strive for. But again, like I said, the talent pool is really need to be
bigger,
grown, bigger and bigger, and it needs to be systemically done. It can't just be done on the whim kind of things.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. That's a wrap up. Again, please give a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg's K1 Ha.
Wow, what a great day of programming and conversations. Thank you all for joining the Bloomberg CEO Forum. I've really enjoyed these conversations up here and hope that you have also enjoyed them. Please join me in thanking all of our fantastic speakers and moderators for such a wonderful program. And of course, a special thank you to our sponsor for making this forum possible, Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation, LPS. And most of all, thank you to all of you for sticking around and being such a great audience. See you next year.